My husband looked me right in the eye as my father lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life, and he told me that my parents were my problem. He sneered, adjusting his designer watch, and declared that my money was mine and his money was his. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply nodded, pulled out my phone, and permanently canceled the $3,000 monthly allowance I had been secretly providing to his entire family. 6 weeks later, his fake financial empire collapsed. His relatives lost everything, and he was quite literally sobbing on his knees at my front door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to legally and systematically dismantle a toxic partner who mistook your generosity for weakness. My name is Clara, and I am 33 years old. Up until 6 weeks ago, I was the supply chain director for a major multinational corporation in Chicago, bringing in a salary of $250,000 a year. My job required me to be highly analytical to track missing inventory and identify weak links in complex global networks. Yet for 5 years, I had completely failed to identify the weakest link in my own home. I thought I had a solid, happy marriage to a man named Derek. He was a 35-year-old independent financial advisor who projected the flawless image of a Wall Street prodigy. We lived a comfortable life, or so I believed, until a sudden medical emergency shattered the grand illusion I had. Derek's days of living off my sweat and blood were officially over. Bin financing. The nightmare began on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a massive quarterly logistics meeting when I received the phone call that makes every child's blood run cold. My father, David, had suffered a severe stroke. I abandoned my presentation, grabbed my keys, and raced across downtown Chicago to the hospital. When I arrived, the intensive care unit was a chaotic blur of sterile smells, harsh fluorescent lights, and the terrifying rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. My father was lying in a hospital bed surrounded by a tangle of plastic tubes and wires. He looked smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him in my entire life. The lead neurologist pulled me into the hallway. His expression was grim, but practical. He explained that my father had suffered significant cognitive trauma, but there was still a critical window of hope. A specialized, highly intensive neurological rehabilitation program could save his cognitive functions and give him a real chance at recovery. The crushing blow came just seconds later. The doctor informed me that Medicare would not cover this specific experimental therapy. Because the specialized facility was private and out-of-network, an upfront payment of $40,000 was required immediately to secure his transfer and begin the treatment that very evening. Panic gripped my chest, making it physically hard to breathe. $40,000 was a massive sum to produce on just a few hours of notice, but I was not helpless. Derek and I had a joint emergency investment fund specifically designated for catastrophic life events. Because Derek was supposedly a financial expert, I let him manage all our liquid assets and investment portfolios. I stepped further down the freezing hospital corridor, my hands shaking violently as I gripped my phone. I dialed Derek's number, needing him to initiate an immediate wire transfer to the hospital's billing department. The phone rang endlessly. A cold, mechanical dial tone was my only answer before it rolled directly to voicemail. I dialed again, pacing the linoleum floor, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. On the fourth attempt, he finally answered. His voice was not filled with concern or panic. It was dripping with profound, unmistakable annoyance. He told me he was on the 14th hole at his exclusive country club and demanded to know why I was interrupting his game. I choked back a desperate sob and begged him to come to the hospital immediately, explaining that my father was in critical condition and we needed to access the emergency funds right now. He arrived over an hour later. While other families in the waiting room were huddled together in tears, seeking comfort in one another, Derek strolled through the double doors wearing his expensive golf polo tailored shorts and soft-spiked golf shoes. He did not ask how my father was doing. He did not pull me into a comforting embrace. He simply crossed his arms and looked at me as if I had inconvenienced his entire week. I quickly explained the dire situation, outlining the doctor's prognosis and the absolute immediate need to liquidate $40,000 from our emergency portfolio to save my father's mind. Derek looked at me, then glanced lazily through the glass window at my unconscious father. He scoffed, a short, cruel sound that echoed loudly in the quiet hospital hallway. He leaned in and delivered the words that would ultimately destroy his life. "Your parents, your problem, Clara. Your money is yours and my money is mine. Do not even think about touching my investment portfolio for this dead-end charity case." I stood absolutely frozen. The air seemed to instantly vanish from the room. The absolute audacity of his words hit me like a physical strike to the jaw. I stared at this man, this supposed financial genius, and the decades of carefully maintained secrets between us suddenly rose to the surface. I did not fall apart. I did not break down into a weeping mess. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over my entire body. "Your portfolio?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. "For 5 years, I have paid 100% of the mortgage on the house I bought before we even met. I cover all the groceries, all the utilities, and I transfer $3,000 every single month into your separate account. I do that so you can support your mother's country club lifestyle and pay the lease on Brittany's luxury car. And you have the nerve to stand here while my father is fighting for his life and tell me that your money is yours." Derek rolled his eyes, utterly unbothered by my distress. He adjusted his heavy designer watch and let out an exasperated sigh. "Stop being such a bean-counting nag," he muttered dismissively. "Figure it out yourself. I have a tea time to finish." Without a single glance back at my father's room, Derek turned around and walked away down the hospital hallway. The soft clacking of his golf shoes against the polished floor was the only sound I heard as my marriage officially ended in my mind. I did not chase after him. I did not beg him to stay. I walked over to a rigid plastic chair in the waiting area and sat down. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my banking application. I bypassed the joint accounts and navigated directly to my personal executive salary account. I went to the recurring transfers page. There it was, the scheduled $3,000 monthly auto transfer to Derek's family account, a secret arrangement to protect his fragile male ego, because he claimed his independent business was just going through a slow phase. With one steady, deliberate press of my thumb, I permanently deleted the transaction. If his money was his money, then starting from this exact second, his family would not receive another dime of mine. I locked my phone, stood up, and walked back to my father's room. The tears were gone. The panic was gone. Derek thought he had put me in my place, but all he had done was hand me the matches to burn his entire fake empire to the ground. I returned to the rigid plastic chair beside my father's hospital bed. The rhythmic hum of the ventilator was the only sound in the room. I had to secure the $40,000 immediately. Since Derek had locked me out of the joint investment accounts we supposedly shared, I called my personal corporate broker and liquidated a portion of my own restricted stock units. I took a massive tax penalty to get the funds expedited, but my father's life was not a negotiation. Within 2 hours, the wire transfer was complete, and the hospital administration confirmed his placement in the specialized neurological rehabilitation program. With my father's immediate safety guaranteed, my panic entirely evaporated, leaving behind a cold and calculating focus. I opened my laptop on the small tray table. For years, my entire career had revolved around auditing massive global supply chains. I tracked missing inventory across continents, identified critical weak points, and dismantled inefficient networks. Now, I was going to turn those exact same forensic skills onto my own life. Derek had always insisted on managing our finances. He claimed it was his domain as an independent financial advisor. I had trusted him blindly, handing over my tax forms and letting him file our joint returns. I navigated to the federal tax portal and requested a password reset. It took me less than 5 minutes to bypass his security questions, answering with the name of his childhood pet and his high school mascot. When the dashboard finally loaded, I downloaded our tax transcripts from the past 5 years. I expected to see the robust portfolio he constantly bragged about at dinner parties. I expected to see the high-yield returns he claimed he was generating from his elite client base. Instead, I found a desolate wasteland of financial failure. Derek was not a Wall Street prodigy. He was a complete fraud. Looking at the business schedules for his independent advisory firm, the numbers laid out a pathetic truth. His gross revenue barely scraped $70,000. After his massive deductions for business expenses, which included his absurdly expensive country club dues, luxury car leases, and client dinners, his net income was less than $58,000 a year. My jaw tightened as I stared at the glaring discrepancy on the screen. My own base salary and performance bonuses exceeded $250,000 annually. The math was brutally simple. Every single luxury Derek flaunted, the tailored suits, the golf trips, the expensive watches, was entirely funded by my hard work. I was the engine powering his entire fake millionaire persona. He was nothing but a parasite wearing a designer tie. But the tax returns were only the surface layer of his deception. My analytical instincts screamed that there was more to uncover. If he lied about his income and the emergency funds, what else had he hidden from me? I logged into the major credit bureaus and pulled a comprehensive credit report for myself. As my eyes scanned down the list of open accounts, my breath hitched in my throat. There, glaring at me under the real estate section, was a massive home equity line of credit. The balance was entirely maxed out at $150,000. My hands began to shake with a violent fury. The house we lived in was solely in my name. I had purchased the property entirely with my own savings 3 years before I even met Derek. He had absolutely no legal right to borrow against my home. I frantically clicked on the account details to view the loan origination documents. The loan had been opened 14 months ago. I scrolled down to the signature line. There, stamped perfectly at the bottom of the digital contract, was an electronic signature bearing my exact name. Derek had forged my signature. He had committed federal financial fraud to extract $150,000 of equity from my house. He did it without my knowledge, without my consent, and had actively hidden the monthly statements by routing the digital mail to a private server. He had literally stolen from my future to subsidize his present. I spent the next 3 hours tracing the flow of the stolen money. By hacking into his personal banking portal using the same reset methods, I found the digital paper trail. The $150,000 had not been invested in any secure portfolios. It had been systematically drained to maintain the extravagant lifestyle of his entire family. I saw wire transfers paying for his sister Brittany's luxury vacations. I saw massive payments to high-end country clubs for his mother Patricia. Derek had essentially used my house as a personal banking machine to buy his family's respect and admiration. He played the generous, wealthy provider while secretly digging a massive pit of debt in my name. The sheer audacity of his betrayal was staggering. He had watched me work 60-hour weeks, watched me stress over supply chain crises, and watched me proudly maintain the house I bought, all while secretly bleeding me dry. And yet just hours ago he had stood in the hospital hallway and refused to help save my father's life, claiming his money was his money. He had guarded a stolen fortune while treating my dying father like an inconvenience. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, reflecting my own face back at me. I was no longer just dealing with a toxic husband or a failing marriage. I was dealing with a criminal. I picked up my phone and sent a secure message to the best divorce attorney in Chicago, a ruthless litigator known for utterly dismantling financial fraudsters. Next, I contacted a private forensic accountant. I requested emergency appointments for the following morning. Derek had spent years building a house of cards on my foundation. Now I possessed all the evidence I needed to blow it away. I settled back into the chair beside my father's bed, holding his fragile hand. I promised him and myself that Derek's days of living off my sweat and blood were officially over. "Your portfolio?" I asked, the words slicing through the quiet hum of the intensive care unit hallway. You are standing here looking at my critically ill father through the glass window, and you have the absolute nerve to tell me about your money. The sheer shock of Derek's callousness acted like a sudden splash of ice water, instantly sobering me. The blinding panic that had gripped my chest since the ambulance arrived completely evaporated. In its place, a razor-sharp, terrifyingly calm clarity took over. I did not cry. I did not dissolve into a puddle of tears or beg him to act like a supportive partner. I looked at the man I had been married to for 5 years. I looked at his tailored shorts, his expensive designer watch, and his soft spiked golf shoes. Every single item he was wearing had been paid for by my corporate salary. I took a step closer to him, closing the physical distance until he was forced to actually look me in the eye. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping it of any emotion, any warmth, and any hesitation. "Let us get something absolutely straight, Derek," I said, refusing to let him look away. "For 5 entire years, I have paid 100% of the mortgage on the house we live in, the house I bought with my own savings before you even put a ring on my finger. I cover all the groceries. I pay the property taxes. I pay the electricity, the water, and the internet." Derek shifted his weight, his eyes darting down the hallway, clearly uncomfortable with my sudden shift in tone. But I was not finished. "And beyond paying for our entire existence," I continued, my voice echoing slightly off the linoleum walls, "I transfer $3,000 every single month directly into your personal account. I do that so you can play the big shot provider for your family. I fund your mother, Patricia, so she can maintain her absurd country club lifestyle, get her weekly deep tissue massages, and pretend she is high society. I pay the lease on your sister Brittany and her brand new Tesla because you claimed she was struggling and needed a reliable vehicle for her job hunt. I have funded your entire family's illusion of wealth, and you have the audacity to stand in front of my dying father and tell me that your money is yours." For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of genuine panic in his eyes. He knew I was right. He knew that the carefully constructed facade of his independent financial advisor career was built entirely on the foundation of my supply chain director salary. But Derek was a master of deflection. Instead of showing an ounce of remorse or empathy, his features hardened into a mask of pure condescension. He let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. "You are always so dramatic, Clara," he muttered, shaking his head. "I tell you to be financially responsible for once, and you instantly turn into a bean-counting nag. You make $250,000 a year. You are a director at a major corporation. You are a smart woman. Figure it out yourself. I am not draining my hard-earned investments just because your parents failed to plan for their own retirement." He checked his designer watch again, tapped his phone screen, and let out an annoyed breath. "I am missing my tea time," he announced casually, as if we were discussing weekend brunch plans instead of my father's survival. "I will see you at home tonight. Try to calm down before I get there." Without another word, without a single glance back at the intensive care unit where the man who had walked me down the aisle was fighting for every breath, Derek turned on his heel. He walked away, his soft spiked shoes clicking rhythmically against the floor, disappearing around the corner toward the elevators. I stood alone in the corridor. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly cruel that it physically ached. But the aching was quickly replaced by a surging, unstoppable wave of resolve. He told me to figure it out myself. He told me that my money was my money. He had just given me permission to cut the cord. I walked over to a rigid plastic chair sitting against the wall of the waiting area. I sat down, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above my head. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I bypassed my messages, bypassed my emails, and opened my primary banking application. The facial recognition scanned my features, unlocking the dashboard of my executive salary account. I navigated straight to the recurring transfers menu. There it was, sitting neatly in the list of automated payments. $3,000 scheduled to transfer on the 1st of every month to the account labeled Derek Family Support. For years, I had let that money leave my account automatically, believing I was being a supportive wife, believing I was investing in our marriage and helping his family stay afloat while he built his advisory business. I had been a fool, but I was not a fool anymore. Seeing the $3,000 auto transfer staring back at me made me feel physically ill. That money equaled $36,000 a year. Over 5 years, I had handed his family $180,000 of my own salary. Money that could have been saved for a moment exactly like this. Money that was instead squandered on Patricia's chemical peels and Brittany's car insurance. I tapped on the recurring transfer. The screen prompted me with options to edit or delete the transaction. I did not hesitate. I pressed delete. A confirmation window popped up warning me that canceling this automatic payment would permanently stop all future transfers to this account. I stared at the warning for exactly 2 seconds. Then I pressed confirm. The screen refreshed. The loading circle spun for a fraction of a second before the payment vanished from the screen forever. The relief was immediate and intoxicating. Just like that, the financial pipeline that kept his mother at the country club and his sister in a luxury electric vehicle was permanently severed. They were cut off. Derek had confidently walked out of this hospital believing he had won the argument. He believed he had successfully defended his imaginary wealth and put his demanding wife back in her place. He had absolutely no idea that by refusing to help my father, he had just bankrupted his mother, repossessed his sister's car, and destroyed his own financial lifeline. Derek wanted to play games with money. He wanted to claim independence while secretly bleeding me dry. The battle lines were officially drawn. The funding was terminated. The war had begun. But I still had an immediate crisis to handle. My father lay unconscious just a few feet away, entirely dependent on my ability to produce $40,000 before the morning shift change. I sat back down in the rigid plastic chair next to his bed and opened my laptop. Since Derek had smugly locked me out of the joint investment accounts we supposedly shared, relying on him was no longer an option. I logged into my personal corporate equity portal. As a supply chain director, part of my compensation included restricted stock units that I had diligently saved for years. I selected the necessary shares and initiated an emergency liquidation. The tax penalty for the expedited withdrawal was staggering, cutting deep into the value of the stock. But my father's cognitive survival was not up for negotiation. Within an hour, the funds cleared into my primary checking account. I immediately wired the full $40,000 to the hospital's billing department. A profound wave of relief washed over me when the administration staff brought the confirmation paperwork, securing his transfer to the specialized neurological rehabilitation program. With my father's immediate safety guaranteed, the adrenaline that had been flooding my system slowly receded. In its place, a chilling, methodical focus took over. The intensive care unit grew quiet as the late-night hours crept in. The nurses moved silently through the dim corridors, and the rhythmic, mechanical breathing of the ventilator provided a steady metronome for my thoughts. I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop. For a decade, my entire professional life had revolved around investigating complex international logistics. I tracked millions of dollars in missing inventory, across continents identified critical vulnerabilities in corporate networks, and ruthlessly dismantled inefficient systems. I was a master at finding leaks and exposing flaws. Now, sitting in the blue light of the monitor, I realized I needed to turn those exact forensic skills onto my own marriage. Derek had always insisted on maintaining absolute control over our finances. From the moment we got married, he established himself as the undisputed authority on all things monetary. He claimed it was his professional domain as an elite, independent financial advisor. I had trusted him completely blindly, handing over my tax forms every spring and signing wherever he placed a sticky note on our joint tax returns. I had never questioned his methods because he projected such an unshakable aura of wealth and success. He wore custom-tailored suits, drove a pristine luxury vehicle, and constantly name-dropped high-net-worth clients. But after his performance in the hallway, that illusion had shattered. I needed to see the raw data. I navigated to the federal tax portal and initiated a password reset for our joint account. Derek was predictable in his arrogance, assuming no one would ever dare to audit him. His security questions were laughably simple. I bypassed the first gate by typing the name of his childhood golden retriever and cleared the second by entering his high school mascot. Within 3 minutes, I had full access to the digital vault of our financial history. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as I requested the official tax transcripts for the past 5 consecutive years. I downloaded the massive files, organizing them into side-by-side windows on my screen. I started with the most recent filing year. I expected to find the robust, high-yield investment portfolios he constantly bragged about to my colleagues at corporate dinners. I braced myself to see the massive capital gains and the lucrative commission structures he claimed he was building. I scrolled down to the schedule reporting his independent business income, holding my breath. The numbers staring back at me made me blink in sheer disbelief. I zoomed in on the document, convinced I had misread the line item. His gross revenue for the entire year was $72,000. I sat perfectly still, my eyes scanning the digits again and again. $72,000. This was the brilliant Wall Street prodigy who mocked my corporate salary. This was the man who claimed his investment strategies were outperforming the market. But the reality was even more pathetic. I scrolled further down the page to examine his business deductions. Derek had aggressively written off every single luxury in his life as a necessary business expense. His exorbitant country club membership, dues, the lease on his imported sports car, his expensive lunches at downtown steakhouses, and his premium golf equipment were all listed as tax-deductible operating costs. When I reached the bottom line, the final net income figure was a devastating slap of reality. After all his extravagant deductions, his actual take-home pay was precisely $57,800. A cold, dark fury began to pool in my stomach. I pulled up my own forms for the same tax year. My base salary combined with my performance bonuses exceeded $250,000. The mathematical truth was brutal and undeniable. There was no financial empire. There was no brilliant investment strategy. Every single luxury Derek flaunted was funded completely and entirely by my sweat, my stress, and my long hours at the office. I was the sole engine powering his entire fake millionaire persona. I clicked through the previous years, watching the same miserable pattern repeat itself. Year after year, he barely scraped by, using my soaring income to mask his professional mediocrity. He had weaponized my trust to build a lavish lifestyle, deliberately keeping me in the dark, while he paraded around as the ultimate breadwinner. He had called me a bean-counting nag when I asked him to help save my dying father, telling me his money was his. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his deception was suffocating. He was not a financial wizard. He was an incredibly arrogant parasite who had spent 5 years wearing a designer suit paid for by his wife. The silence of the hospital room felt heavy. I looked over at my father, his chest rising and falling with the help of the machine. I had spent years desperately trying to be the perfect supportive wife to a man who viewed me as nothing more than a blank check. Derek thought he had secured his position at the top of the hierarchy. He thought his secrets were safe behind his passwords and his confident swagger. He was wrong. The financial autopsy had only just begun, and I was going to dissect every single lie he had ever told. I would strip away every layer of his perfectly manicured existence until there was nowhere left for him to hide. As the dawn began to break outside the hospital window, casting a pale gray light across the sterile room, my resolve solidified into an unbreakable iron core. The war was fully underway. The war was fully underway, but I knew the tax returns were merely the surface layer of a much deeper, darker financial abyss. Derek had hidden his pathetic income behind my corporate salary, but my analytical instincts, honed by years of hunting down missing international inventory, screamed that there was more to uncover. If he had lied so easily about his earnings and our emergency funds, I needed to know exactly how much damage he had done to our liabilities. I needed to see our actual debt. I opened a new tab on my browser and navigated to the primary credit bureaus. Paying the premium fee for immediate access, I pulled a comprehensive 3-bureau credit report for myself. I had always maintained a pristine credit score, managing my finances with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to my supply chain networks. I expected to see my standard credit cards, the remaining balance on my student loans, and the mortgage for our home. As the report populated on my screen, I scrolled past the familiar green check marks indicating perfect payment histories. I moved past the revolving credit lines and the installment loans. Then I reached the real estate section. My breath hitched, catching painfully in my throat. My eyes locked onto an unfamiliar massive account sitting right beneath my primary mortgage. It was a home equity line of credit. The account was fully active and the balance was entirely maxed out at $150,000. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the impossible numbers. A freezing, paralyzing dread washed over me, numbing my fingertips. The house we lived in, the beautiful, sprawling property in the Chicago suburbs, was solely in my name. I had purchased that property entirely with my own savings 3 years before I even met Derek. He had absolutely no legal right to borrow against my home. It was my premarital asset guarded by a very specific deed structure. My hands began to shake with a violent, consuming fury. How had he managed to leverage a house he did not own? I copied the origination bank name and the account number from the credit report. I opened another window and navigated directly to that specific bank's online portal. I tried Derek's email address and his predictable password combination. The system rejected it. I tried another variation utilizing the year we got married and his mother's maiden name. The security gates swung open, granting me full access to the digital dashboard. I clicked wildly through the account details, bypassing the monthly statements and navigating straight to the loan origination documents. The digital file took a few agonizing seconds to load over the hospital's wireless network. When the PDF finally appeared, the horrible truth was laid bare in stark black and white legal text. The loan had been opened 14 months ago. I scrolled rapidly down the multi-page document, scanning the dense financial jargon, searching for the final page. When I reached the bottom, a wave of pure nausea hit me. There, stamped perfectly on the primary borrower's signature line, was my exact name. It was an electronic signature executed through a secure digital portal. Derek had forged my signature. He had committed federal financial fraud to extract $150,000 of hard-earned equity from my house. I clicked on the electronic signature certificate details, tracking the digital footprint of the transaction. The IP address associated with the signing did not match my corporate office, nor did it match my personal devices. The confirmation emails had been routed to a private encrypted server domain that I immediately recognized as Derek's secondary business account. He had orchestrated the entire scheme from his home office, intercepting the bank's verification calls and digitally impersonating me to secure the loan. He had deliberately hidden the monthly statements by opting for paperless billing sent exclusively to that hidden server. I reviewed the transaction history on the fraudulent account, matching the dates of his massive withdrawals with his most arrogant purchases. A $20,000 draw perfectly coincided with the month he bought his mother Patricia her elite country club membership. A $30,000 transfer aligned exactly with the sudden down payment on his sister Brittany's luxury electric vehicle. He had extracted chunks of my home's equity to buy the admiration and loyalty of his entitled family. He was playing the generous, wealthy provider to them while secretly digging a massive pit of debt in my name. The magnitude of his crime was staggering. This was not just a case of a toxic husband overspending on a joint credit card. This was a calculated, premeditated felony. He was guilty of wire fraud, identity theft, and severe financial abuse. Derek had literally treated my house, my security, and my future as his own personal banking machine. I sat perfectly still in the sterile hospital room, the only movement coming from my father's steady machine-assisted breathing. The sheer audacity of Derek's betrayal echoed in my mind. He had stood in this very hallway just hours ago. He had adjusted his expensive watch, looked down his nose at me, and declared that his money was his money. Meanwhile, he was actively servicing a massive, fraudulent debt that he had strapped directly onto my back. He had used my pristine credit and my home equity to fund his illusion of a successful Wall Street career. The burning anger inside me began to cool, crystallizing into a lethal, unyielding calmness. I was no longer a grieving daughter begging an unfeeling husband for help. I was a corporate director staring at a criminal who had vastly underestimated his victim. I meticulously organized the downloaded files into a secure digital dossier. I named the folder with his full legal name, a fitting title for the casket I was building for his career. Every piece of data, every fraudulent signature, every hidden transfer was cataloged. I was a supply chain expert. I knew exactly how to track raw materials from their origin to their final destination, and tracking Derek's stolen funds was no different. The money trail was indisputable. I checked the time on my laptop. It was nearing 6 in the morning. The hospital corridors were beginning to stir with the morning shift change. Derek would be waking up soon in our spacious master bedroom, completely unaware that his entire financial existence had just been laid bare on my screen. He would probably check his phone expecting a desperate apologizing text message from me. He would expect me to be begging for his financial expertise. He was so deeply entrenched in his own narcissism that he could not see the avalanche suspended directly above him. He had mistaken my previous trust for stupidity. I packed my laptop into my bag, making sure the backup drives were securely hidden in the zippered pockets. I stood up and gently squeezed my father's warm hand, promising him silently that I would handle the man who had tried to leave him for dead. Derek had committed a federal offense. This was identity theft, wire fraud, and severe financial abuse, all wrapped into one arrogant package. I was not just going to divorce him. I was going to ensure that he faced the full crushing weight of the United States justice system. I grabbed my coat and prepared to leave the hospital. I had a lot of work to do, and Derek's total annihilation required my absolute focus. 72 hours had passed since I walked out of that intensive care unit and permanently severed the financial artery feeding my husband's illusions. I had not returned to the house. Instead, I checked into an extended stay executive suite directly across the street from the rehabilitation center, where my father was now safely recovering. For 3 days, I operated with a lethal mechanical efficiency. I took a temporary leave of absence from my corporate office, redirecting all my supply chain tracking skills into building an airtight federal case against the man I married. My hotel room had transformed into a war room. The walls were lined with printed bank statements, wire transfer logs, and the forged home equity loan documents. I had engaged a ruthless divorce attorney and a forensic accountant who were already preparing the legal barrage. Derek had sent me exactly 14 text messages during this time. They started as annoyed demands for my whereabouts, shifted into patronizing instructions to stop throwing a tantrum, and finally settled into a sullen silence when I simply refused to respond. He had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath his feet was already gone. The automated monthly transfer of $3,000 had officially failed to execute on Thursday morning. I knew it was only a matter of time before the financial drought hit the lower branches of his family tree. Derek lived a cash-poor existence, completely reliant on my scheduled deposits to cover the massive credit card bills he racked up, keeping his mother and sister steeped in luxury. Without my corporate salary instantly refilling his depleted accounts, his entire ecosystem was designed to crash. I was sitting at the hotel desk on Friday afternoon, carefully highlighting the fraudulent internet protocol addresses on the loan origination file when my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood surface. The caller identification displayed a name that made a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. It was Patricia. I picked up the phone, tapped the accept button, and pressed the speaker icon. I did not even get the chance to say hello before a shrill, venomous shriek exploded from the device. "Clara, what is wrong with your bank?" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic, suppressed rage. I could hear the ambient, soothing flute music of a luxury day spa playing in the background, contrasting sharply with her absolute panic. I am standing at the reception desk of the Azure Wellness Retreat, and the concierge just handed me back my premium platinum card. It declined, Clara. It declined in front of the entire waiting room. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the forged signature on the document in front of me, and let her rant. I have been coming to this spa for 3 years. Patricia continued, her voice rising in pitch as her embarrassment morphed into fury. I had an $800 revitalizing mud wrap, a gold leaf facial, and a champagne deep tissue massage. The manager looked at me like I was some kind of street beggar. Derek gave me this card specifically for my wellness days. He told me it was tied to your joint accounts. Did you freeze the cards just because you are throwing a childish fit over your father? Did you lock my son out of his own money to punish him for missing a hospital visit? The sheer entitlement radiating from the phone was staggering. She honestly believed that her $800 facial was a basic human right, funded by the magical endless well of my labor. She believed that freezing the accounts was a petty vindictive tantrum rather than a necessary defense against a federal crime. I remained completely silent, letting the dead air stretch across the line. My silence only infuriated her more, pulling the mask of the sophisticated wealthy matriarch completely off her face. You are listening to me? Are you not? She snarled. You need to call the bank and authorize this transaction immediately. Derek works incredibly hard to manage the wealth in this family, and you are actively sabotaging his accounts because you are a dry, bitter, joyless workaholic. You have always been jealous of the way we live. You sit in your sterile corporate office counting boxes and spreadsheets, while my son actually builds a legacy. You should be on your knees thanking God that a handsome, successful man like Derek even looks at you. The psychological abuse flowed effortlessly from her lips, a well-rehearsed script she must have recited to Derek 100 times behind my back. You are utterly sterile, Clara. Patricia spat, her tone dripping with absolute disgust. You are 33 years old, and you have given my son nothing. No children, no warmth, no affection. You are nothing but a cold, corporate drone. Derek deserves a woman who understands luxury and family values. He deserves a wife who supports his elite status instead of trying to control him with money. He puts up with your miserable, exhausting personality because he is a good, patient man. The absolute least you could do is make sure his mother is not publicly humiliated at a spa because you forgot to transfer the funds to cover the bills. You are a terrible wife, and you are an even worse daughter-in-law. Now fix this banking error immediately before I call Derek and tell him exactly how you are treating his family. I sat in the quiet hotel room listening to the echoing silence after her tirade finally paused for breath. For years, I had bent over backwards trying to earn this woman's approval. I had endured her snide comments about my wardrobe, her passive-aggressive remarks about my career, and her constant demands for expensive gifts. I had funded her entire existence believing that being a good wife meant taking care of my husband's family. I had paid for her country club memberships, her fine dining, and apparently her gold leaf facials. And in return, she viewed me as an ugly, incompetent workhorse whose only purpose was to finance the superior bloodline of her fraudulent son. She thought she held the power. She thought her harsh words would reduce me to the anxious, accommodating woman I used to be. She expected me to frantically apologize, to call the bank, and to restore the flow of stolen money to protect my fragile marriage. She had no idea that she was screaming at a woman who had already drafted her son's federal prison roadmap. The insult about me being a cold corporate drone was actually the highest compliment she could have given me. I was a corporate drone, and I was about to execute a corporate restructuring that would leave her entire family bankrupt. Clara, are you there? Patricia barked, her patience entirely evaporated. I am standing at the counter and the manager is waiting. Transfer the $800 right now. I let out a slow, steady breath. The anger had completely burned away, leaving a perfectly chilled, absolute resolve. The time for being the accommodating, generous wife was dead and buried. I leaned closer to the phone's microphone, ensuring my voice carried the precise, razor-sharp tone I used when dismantling a failing vendor contract in the corporate boardroom. I did not yell. I did not match her frantic, escalating panic. I simply let the absolute freezing temperature of my voice do the heavy lifting. Derek's money is... Derek's money, Patricia, I said, enunciating every single syllable with crystal clarity. Ask your wealthy, successful son to pay for your mud bath. Before she could even draw a breath to launch into another tirade of insults, before she could utter a single syllable of protest or demand to speak to a manager, I pressed the red button on my screen. The line went dead. The soothing background flute music of the Azure Wellness Retreat vanished, replaced by the absolute unbroken silence of my hotel suite. I immediately tapped her contact profile and hit block caller. I did the exact same thing for Derek. I did it for Brittany. With 3 quick taps of my finger, I effectively erased their ability to poison my airspace. They were no longer my family. They were hostile entities, and I was permanently cutting their communication lines. I sat back in my chair and let the silence wash over me. A strange, profound physical sensation settled into my bones. The anxiety that had plagued my marriage for 5 years, the constant, suffocating pressure to be the perfect provider, to earn enough to keep Derek happy and his family satisfied entirely, evaporated. The emotional tether connecting me to my husband simply dissolved into thin air. I did not feel heartbreak. I did not feel the crushing grief of a failed marriage or the sting of a wasted youth. I felt nothing but a terrifying, brilliant, tactical clarity. The emotional detachment was absolutely complete. This was no longer a domestic dispute about wedding vows or broken promises. This was a corporate liquidation, and Derek was the toxic asset I was about to ruthlessly excise from my portfolio. I picked up my phone again. During my sleepless hours the previous night, I had compiled a short list of the most aggressive, high-powered legal representatives in Chicago. I bypassed the gentle mediators and the collaborative divorce practitioners. I needed a shark litigator who specialized in high net worth dissolution and complex financial fraud. I dialed the direct office line for a senior partner known for utterly destroying grifters in open court. When her paralegal answered, I did not offer a tearful sob story about a cheating or neglectful husband. I delivered a crisp, bulleted summary of the situation. I stated my name, my corporate title, and my annual compensation. I informed the paralegal that my husband had fraudulently executed a $150,000 home equity line of credit against a premarital property held solely in my name, using a forged electronic signature. I added that I possessed the complete digital paper trail verifying the theft, and I required immediate emergency injunctive relief to freeze his access to all marital assets. The paralegal placed me on a brief hold. Less than 40 seconds later, the senior partner picked up the line. She did not offer empty condolences or patronizing sympathy. She asked for my current location and told me she was clearing her afternoon schedule. She instructed me to upload every single tax return, credit report, and digital signature certificate to her firm's encrypted server. I outlined my core objectives with absolute precision. I wanted my house secured, I wanted Derek's hidden accounts exposed, and I wanted an impenetrable legal barricade erected between my future earnings and his impending financial collapse. The attorney agreed to file the initial motions before the courts closed for the weekend. We were officially going on the offensive. As soon as I concluded the call with the attorney, I moved directly to my next target. Derek's entire illusion was built on moving my money through his accounts to mask his abject failures. To guarantee his destruction, I needed a certified expert to map the exact trajectory of every single stolen dollar. I contacted a premier forensic accounting firm located in the financial district. I spoke directly with a lead investigator, laying out the parameters of the assignment. I explained that Derek operated as an independent financial advisor, leveraging his professional credentials to manipulate tax documents and obscure unauthorized withdrawals from my home equity. I needed a comprehensive audit that would trace the $150,000 he had illegally extracted from my home, detailing exactly how much had been funneled to his mother's luxury expenses, his sister's car payments, and his own fabricated business overhead. The forensic accountant understood the mission immediately. He requested access to the tax portals and banking dashboards I had already breached. He assured me that his team would generate a meticulous court-admissible report demonstrating a clear pattern of fiduciary fraud and marital theft. Every cent Derek had spent on expensive steakhouses and tailored suits using my stolen equity would be cataloged and weaponized against him. I hung up the phone and looked around my makeshift war room. The printed documents covering the desk were no longer just pieces of paper. They were the heavy ammunition I would use to level Derek's fake empire. I spent the next hour scanning every page of the forged loan documents, the tax returns, and the digital login histories. I meticulously labeled each file, constructing a chronological timeline of his deceit. As the progress bar on the secure upload portal reached 100%, I felt a deep, resonant satisfaction. The legal machinery was now in motion. Derek was currently playing the back nine at his country club, blissfully unaware that a judge would soon be reviewing his fraudulent electronic signatures. He had probably ignored his mother's frantic phone calls from the spa, assuming it was just a minor banking error that I would eventually fix. He had no idea that his entire financial ecosystem was crashing down around him. Outside the hotel window, the Chicago skyline stood tall against the afternoon sun. I thought about my father resting in the rehabilitation facility just a few blocks away. Derek had looked at my dying father and declared that my family was my problem. He had confidently asserted that his money belonged strictly to him entirely, forgetting that his entire existence was subsidized by my labor. By cutting him off, I had effectively initiated a total system failure in his personal life. The tactical takedown was fully operational, and I was going to enjoy watching every single one of his dominoes fall. The weekend passed in a state of absolute meticulous preparation. I did not leave my hotel suite except to visit my father, whose condition was finally stabilizing thanks to the world-class neurological team I had secured. By Monday morning, the tactical silence I had imposed on my life was suddenly shattered. I had blocked the primary phone numbers for Derek, Patricia, and Brittany, ensuring my personal device remained a fortress of tranquility. However, entitlement always finds a way to broadcast itself. My corporate smartphone, a secondary device I used exclusively for global supply chain logistics, began to vibrate continuously against the glass surface of the desk. The incoming messages were not from international vendors or regional managers. They were pouring in from an unregistered number, but the frantic, venomous tone identified the sender instantly. It was Brittany. She had somehow bypassed my personal blockade by finding my direct corporate line, and she was currently experiencing a complete unhinged meltdown. I unlocked the screen and watched the barrage of text messages roll in one after another, rapid-fire bursts of pure, unfiltered panic. "Clara, you need to fix this right now," the first message demanded. I just woke up to a final repossession warning from the auto finance company. They are threatening to send a tow truck to my driveway for the Tesla. The automatic payment from Derek declined on Friday. I tried calling him, but he said his accounts are frozen and told me to ask you. What is your problem? I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the words sink in. Derek had apparently realized he was locked out of the stolen equity and was currently playing dumb, redirecting his furious sister back to the source of the funds he had so carelessly mocked. Brittany had no concept of the reality of her situation. She genuinely believed that her $90,000 electric vehicle was a fundamental human right, a birthright guaranteed by my continued corporate labor. The messages continued to flood the screen, growing increasingly hostile and entirely disconnected from reality. "You are seriously doing this over a hospital bill," the next text read. "Derek told us you are throwing a massive fit because he would not liquidate his investments for your dad. So your solution is to cut off our family. My husband needs this car for his commute. I need this car for my lifestyle brand. You cannot just cut off the funding we rely on because you are having an emotional crisis. Pay the bank today, or I am driving to your office." The sheer audacity of her logic was almost impressive. She was demanding that I continue to finance her luxury lifestyle brand, while simultaneously criticizing me for having an emotional crisis over my dying father. She was openly admitting that she relied on my funding, completely shattering Derek's illusion that he was the sole provider for his family. I did not respond. I simply watched the cursor bubble appear and disappear as Brittany typed frantically, her rage boiling over into outright extortion. "If you do not wire the $3,000 by noon, I am taking this public," she threatened. "I will post everything on social media. I will tag your company, your board of directors, and every single executive in your network. I have over 50,000 followers, Clara. I will expose you as a financially abusive, controlling wife who uses money to manipulate and starve her husband's family. I will tell the world how you are trying to ruin Derek's career and punishing his innocent mother and sister out of pure spite. Do not test me. I will ruin your corporate reputation in a matter of hours." I sat back in my chair and let out a genuine, relaxed laugh. It was the first time I'd laughed in nearly a week. Brittany thought she was holding a gun to my head. She thought the threat of social media exposure would terrify a corporate director into submission. She failed to realize that her unhinged threats were the exact pieces of evidence my legal team needed to obliterate Derek's defense. By threatening to expose me as financially abusive for cutting off her allowance, Brittany was actively documenting a written confession. She was putting into permanent digital ink the fact that Derek was funneling marital assets to her. She was proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the $3,000 monthly transfer was not an isolated gift, but an expected demanded subsidy that fueled their entire existence. I did not block this unknown number. I did not engage in a digital screaming match. Instead, I activated the screen recording function on my corporate device. I slowly scrolled through every single text message, capturing the timestamps, the threats of public defamation, and the explicit demands for the Tesla payments. I took high-resolution screenshots of her blackmail attempts, ensuring that every abusive word was perfectly preserved. Once the digital evidence was secured, I opened my encrypted email client and drafted a new message to my forensic accountant and my divorce attorney. I attached the video files and the screenshots. My accompanying text was brief and entirely professional. "Please add the attached extortion attempts to the primary affidavit," I wrote. "My sister-in-law is currently demanding the continuation of the stolen equity funds to prevent the repossession of her vehicle. She has threatened corporate defamation if the unauthorized financial support is not reinstated immediately. This should thoroughly support our claims of fiduciary fraud and marital asset dissipation." I hit send and watched the progress bar complete the upload. The trap was growing tighter by the minute. Brittany thought she was a powerful social media influencer, leveraging her audience to secure her luxury car. In reality, she was a frantic, entitled dependent who had just handed federal investigators a golden ticket. My phone vibrated one last time with a final message from the unregistered number. "You have until noon, Clara. Do not make me destroy you." I placed the phone face down on the hotel desk and turned my attention back to the Chicago skyline outside my window. The morning sun was reflecting brilliantly off the glass skyscrapers. I felt absolutely no fear regarding her empty threats. Let her post whatever fabricated sob story she wanted. Let her broadcast her entitlement to her followers. The louder she screamed about being cut off, the tighter the federal noose would pull around her brother's neck. I poured myself another cup of coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace. The financial drought had officially hit the lower branches, and the resulting desperation was exactly what I needed to move to the next phase of my plan. The morning sunlight glinted off the steel skyscrapers as I navigated the bustling downtown streets toward our meeting point. I had chosen a secluded corner booth in an upscale cafe, a location that offered enough anonymity for the delicate operation I was undertaking. I was not there to meet a friend. I was there to meet a collaborator. A single ping resonated from my phone. A simple brief message from an unknown number. It was Jamal. "I am inside, near the back." The message was concise, devoid of any unnecessary pleasantries, which was exactly how I preferred it. I walked into the cafe and spotted him immediately. Jamal sat with his back to the wall, his posture erect and calm. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer, his dark skin contrasting sharply with the crisp white of his shirt. He was a professional auditor, a man whose entire career was defined by his ability to identify discrepancies and uncover buried truths. In the years I had known him as my brother-in-law, Jamal had always been the quiet, observant force at our noisy family gatherings. He watched from the periphery, rarely speaking unless necessary, and I had often mistaken his silence for passivity. I realized now that I had been wrong. He was not passive, he was waiting. As I approached the booth, Jamal rose to his feet, acknowledging me with a respectful nod. He did not attempt a sympathetic hug or offer hollow platitudes about my marriage. He understood the gravity of the situation and treated me as an equal, a fellow professional prepared to dismantle a fraud. I sat down, and without a single word of wasted preamble, Jamal reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder and slid it slowly across the polished wood table until it came to rest in front of me. His eyes were intelligent and unyielding. The folder did not just contain paper, it was a roadmap of Derek's deceit. I placed my hands on the textured surface of the folder, feeling its weight. Before I opened it, I looked up at Jamal. "Thank you for doing this," I said. "I know this is complicated given your relationship with Brittany." Jamal's expression remained stoic and professional. "Family is a construct, Clara," he said, his voice deep and measured. "But integrity is a principle. I have spent the last 3 weeks conducting a deep dive into the household accounts and the business records Derek allowed me to see. I had suspicions for a long time, but I lacked the internal visibility into the corporate logistics that you provided when you granted me access." He leaned forward, his focus absolute. "I have been an auditor for over a decade. I have seen every variation of financial manipulation, every shell game, and every desperate attempt to project success where none exists. What Derek is doing is not just poor management, it is a systematic, institutionalized fraud. He is not merely living beyond his means, he is actively stealing from the people who trust him the most." I watched him as he spoke, struck by the utter clarity he brought to the situation. He was not acting out of spite or a desire for drama. He was articulating the objective truth of a crime. He was my intellectual equal, in every sense a man who saw through the flimsy veneer of Derek's affluent persona with the same clinical distance I felt toward the man I once called my husband. He tapped his finger against the folder. "Inside, you will find a full independent reconciliation of the household accounts versus the business revenue reports. Derek told our parents he was generating a 10% return on investment for his clients. He told Brittany and her mother that his firm was expanding into new markets. The reality is quite different. He has been taking money from new clients to pay out returns to old ones. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme packaged in a tailored suit and a country club membership." My heart hammered against my ribs, not from panic, but from the grim satisfaction of having my worst fears confirmed by an objective expert. I had suspected he was living on my salary, but the idea that he was running a Ponzi scheme within his own small firm had never crossed my mind. He took money from his own family members to keep the ship from sinking. Jamal continued, his eyes darkening. "He convinced my mother-in-law to invest her life savings in a non-existent fund. He convinced my parents to provide him with capital for projects that never broke ground. And all the while he has been siphoning the excess cash flow into offshore accounts that I have tracked to a digital repository in the Cayman Islands. He is smart, I will give him that. He hid the tracks well, but he left a digital trail that any competent auditor can follow if they know where to look. And I knew exactly where to look because he made the mistake of thinking I was too distracted by my own work to ever scrutinize his." I opened the folder. The contents were pristine, organized, tabbed, and cross-referenced with bank statements I had seen previously. It was a masterpiece of investigative accounting. I looked up at him, my mind already running through the legal implications. "You have given me the weapon I need to take him down, Jamal. Why are you risking your own standing by helping me?" Jamal shrugged, a slight, almost imperceptible lift of his shoulders. "I am not risking anything by telling the truth, Clara. I am protecting my own integrity. I have a wife who is currently threatening to destroy your reputation because she cannot bear the thought of losing her luxury car. I have a family that values prestige above all else. I want no part of that collapse. If this information helps you secure your assets and protects your parents from any further predatory lending, then my job is done. His respect was the greatest support I could have asked for. He did not view me as a woman scorned, nor as a victim of a bad marriage. He viewed me as a colleague facing a massive logistical error that required an immediate strategic solution. We sat in the quiet cafe for the next hour, discussing the intricate details of the financial audit. We planned every step of the handover to the forensic accountants and the legal team. We were not just two people discussing a divorce. We were architects of justice, drafting the blueprints for the total destruction of Derek's false life. For the first time since my father's stroke, I felt powerful. The storm was coming, and Derek was completely unprepared for the professional level of the fight he had triggered. I watched Jamal carefully as he reached back into his leather briefcase. The initial audit reports he had provided were already enough to secure a federal indictment, but the rigid set of his jaw told me we had not yet reached the bottom of the abyss. He withdrew a second, much thinner folder. Unlike the pristine corporate-style binding of the first dossier, this one looked highly personal. The edges were slightly worn, and Jamal's knuckles turned white as his fingers gripped the manila cover. He placed it squarely between us, keeping his hand resting heavily on top of it. Up until this exact moment, Jamal had maintained the detached clinical objectivity of an independent auditor. Now the professional mask slipped just a fraction, revealing a profound, simmering fury underneath. This was no longer just about protecting his integrity or stepping away from his wife's entitled family. This was personal. I always suspected Derek was a fraud, Jamal explained, his deep voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge. For years, I had to sit at those ridiculous holiday dinners and listen to him hold court. He bragged about being the breadwinner, calling you a corporate drone. But when I looked at my own credit reports, I found he used my identity and your cash flow to launder his catastrophic stock market losses. Jamal opened the folder and flipped to the first page. It was a comprehensive consumer credit report, but the name at the top was not Derek's, it was Jamal's. I decided to run a routine sweep of my own credit profiles 3 weeks ago, shortly after Derek started acting erratic about a supposed market dip. Jamal continued, pointing a long finger at a series of highlighted trade lines. What I found completely defied logic. There were 4 active brokerage accounts and 2 high-yield credit lines opened under my Social Security number. Accounts I never authorized. Accounts I never signed for. I leaned in my eyes, scanning the highlighted sections. The balances were terrifying. The sheer volume of leveraged debt tied directly to Jamal's identity was staggering. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. Derek had positioned himself as the trusted financial advisor for his entire extended family. Under the guise of helping Jamal and Brittany manage their taxes and future investments, he had collected all of their highly sensitive personal identifying information. He had weaponized their trust using Jamal's immaculate credit score to open shadow accounts. Jamal traced the flow of funds on a printed spreadsheet, mapping out the devastating mechanics of Derek's scheme. Derek considers himself a day trader, but he possesses absolutely no risk management skills. He was trading on margin, borrowing heavily against these shadow accounts to make highly speculative bets on volatile tech stocks. When the market inevitably turned against him, he was hit with massive margin calls. The brokerages demanded immediate cash deposits to cover the plunging value of his leveraged positions. I stared at the spreadsheet, my blood running cold, as I recognized the exact dates of the deposits being used to cover those margin calls. They perfectly aligned with the first week of every single month. He used my automated transfers. I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Exactly, Jamal confirmed, nodding grimly. The $3,000 you transferred every month to support his mother and sister never actually went to them directly. Derek routed your clean corporate salary into these shadow accounts opened in my name. He used your money to wash his catastrophic debt, satisfying the margin calls just enough to keep the brokerages from liquidating the portfolios. Once the debt was temporarily stabilized, he would siphon the remaining equity back out to pay for Brittany's Tesla and Patricia's country club dues. He essentially turned my identity into a money laundering machine fueled entirely by your paycheck. The depths of Derek's depravity were almost difficult to comprehend. He had not merely lied to me about his income or forged my signature on a home equity line of credit. He had actively dragged his own brother-in-law into a federal financial crime without a single ounce of consent. If the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority had caught wind of these highly irregular margin covers, Jamal's entire career as an independent auditor could have been destroyed. He could have faced federal prosecution for money laundering and wire fraud, all because he married Derek's sister. "He compromised you," I said, looking up at Jamal, feeling a sudden surge of fierce solidarity with the man sitting across from me. "He put your license, your freedom, and your entire future on the line just to cover his own gambling addiction." "He threw me under the bus without a second thought," Jamal agreed, closing the folder with a sharp, decisive snap. "If I had not caught this anomaly during my personal audit, I would have been the one facing federal investigators when this house of cards inevitably collapsed. Derek assumed that because I am quiet at family dinners, I am oblivious. He assumed that because I love his sister, I would turn a blind eye to his creative accounting. He made a fatal miscalculation." Jamal slid the personal file across the table, adding it to the growing mountain of evidence we were compiling. The alliance between us solidified into an unbreakable pact. We were two highly skilled, deeply analytical professionals who had been targeted by a reckless, arrogant grifter. Derek had mistaken my generosity for stupidity, and he had mistaken Jamal's silence for submission. "We are going to give this to your forensic accountant," Jamal stated, his eyes locked onto mine with unwavering resolve. "We are going to document every single unauthorized trade, every forged application, and every laundered dollar." Derek wanted to play the role of the Wall Street titan. "We are going to ensure he gets the full federal scrutiny that comes with the title." I nodded carefully, placing the folders into my bag. The sheer weight of the evidence was comforting. Derek had built a sophisticated trap, entirely unaware that he had just locked himself inside it with two predators. I thanked Jamal, paid for our coffees, and walked out of the cafe into the bustling Chicago morning. I had a meeting with my legal team, and I was bringing them the exact ammunition needed to trigger a financial execution. But before I walked into that law office, Jamal and I had one final crucial task to complete. We left the crowded cafe and walked 2 blocks to a private rented workspace I had secured earlier that morning. I needed a secure, unmonitored network and absolute privacy to execute the next phase of our strategy. Once the heavy, soundproof door clicked shut behind us, the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. There were no emotional outbursts, no shared grief over the profound betrayal of our respective spouses, and absolutely no hesitation. We operated strictly as two seasoned professionals conducting a hostile corporate takeover. Jamal set his briefcase on the polished concrete table while I booted up my heavily encrypted laptop. We looked at each other from across the table, silently acknowledging the gravity of the pact we had just formed. We were about to systematically dismantle Derek's entire existence, tearing down his false empire brick by stolen brick. "I need full visibility," I stated, opening a blank, heavily formatted spreadsheet on my monitor. "I know exactly how to trace the supply chain of these stolen funds, but I need the raw data from his shadow accounts. Can you get us past his firewalls without triggering an administrative alert to his phone?" Jamal pulled a small encrypted solid-state drive from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the table. He explained that Derek was a creature of extreme arrogance. Derek believed he was a cybersecurity genius simply because he used a basic virtual private network and standard two-factor authentication. However, Derek was fundamentally lazy. He had routed the backup recovery protocols for his offshore shell accounts directly through the shared home network he had established for Brittany. Jamal, being a meticulous auditor, had easily mapped the entire network topology of his own house months ago. By exploiting that sheer laziness, Jamal had essentially walked through Derek's digital back door without tripping a single alarm. Jamal plugged the drive into my device. A black command terminal instantly popped up on my screen. His fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a series of precise commands that bypassed the primary authentication gateways. He linked the recovery keys to a hidden server. Jamal murmured, his eyes locked on the scrolling green text. And he used my identity to register the domain. Since I am technically the legal owner of the server, requesting a master override is completely within my rights. The terminal vanished, replaced by the sterile minimalist interface of an offshore banking portal. The dashboard loaded, displaying 5 separate shell entities. Derek had named them using incredibly generic corporate-sounding acronyms like Zenith Global Strategies and Apex Wealth Solutions to avoid detection by standard banking algorithms. I clicked on the master ledger for the primary holding account. The transactional data flooded my screen, a cascading waterfall of federal crimes laid bare in black and white. We worked in absolute silence for the next 4 hours, breaking only to take quick sips of cold coffee. I applied my rigorous corporate logistics framework to his financial data. I treated every stolen dollar as a piece of missing inventory, tracking its exact origin, its transit route, and its final destination. We documented the precise moment Derek siphoned cash from my forged home equity line of credit. We mapped its journey through Jamal's compromised identity, and we recorded its final deployment to cover his disastrous margin calls. "Look at this batch of transfers," Jamal instructed, pointing his pen at a cluster of transactions from the previous October. He moved $40,000 into a high-yield holding account, let it sit for exactly 3 days to generate a fake statement showing liquidity, and then immediately wired it back out to a private car dealership. He used the inflated statement to secure the financing for Brittany's vehicle, but the actual cash was stolen directly from your home equity. The sheer volume of fraud was staggering, but I refused to let anger cloud my focus. I captured every screen, exported every ledger, and downloaded the raw, separated value files. We were not just collecting evidence for a civil divorce proceeding. We were actively packaging a comprehensive, undeniable dossier for federal investigators. We cross-referenced the Internet Protocol logs, proving that every single fraudulent trade and illegal transfer originated from the exact location of Derek's home office. We compiled the metadata that stripped away his ability to claim ignorance or identity theft. He was the sole architect of this massive financial disaster. I created separate digital folders for each specific crime, organizing the data into pristine legal exhibits. Exhibit A mapped the stolen equity. Exhibit B outlined the identity theft against Jamal. Another folder cataloged the massive tax evasion scheme, highlighting how he wrote off personal luxury expenses as business losses, while hiding his actual debt structure. I made sure that when a federal prosecutor eventually opened this file, they would not have to search for the crime. The entire narrative of his guilt was handed to them on a silver platter. By mid-afternoon, my hard drive contained over 2 gigabytes of categorized, heavily encrypted financial treason. We had built an impenetrable wall of evidence. We had the forged signatures, the laundered funds, the unauthorized shadow accounts, and the fraudulent tax deductions. We had everything required to trigger an immediate, devastating investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Jamal leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long, steady breath. The extraction operation was completely successful. He safely ejected his solid-state drive and slipped it back into his tailored jacket pocket. His posture remained perfectly rigid, his face a mask of professional satisfaction. "He is going to burn," Jamal stated quietly, a note of grim finality in his deep voice. "He built a house of cards on our backs, Clara. Let the feds strike the match." I closed my laptop, the metallic snap echoing loudly in the quiet room. I slid the device into my leather tote bag and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. "I am heading straight to my attorney," I replied, meeting his gaze. "Derek thinks he is currently fighting a disgruntled wife over a hospital bill. He has absolutely no idea he is about to face the United States Department of Justice." We packed up our belongings in the workspace together, our alliance cemented in digital stone, ready to unleash the full force of the law upon the man who had tried to ruin us both. I returned to my hotel suite as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the Chicago skyline. The encrypted hard drive felt like a block of lead inside my leather tote bag. Before heading to the law firm, I needed to review the digital exhibits one final time. I wanted absolute perfection. I wanted every document properly indexed so my attorney could file the emergency injunctions the moment my feet crossed the threshold of her office. I set up my workstation at the small glass table overlooking the bustling city streets, booted up my laptop, and opened the master directory Jamal and I had extracted. I treated every single document as a toxic liability that needed to be categorized, quantified, and prepared for the ultimate audit. I meticulously clicked through Exhibit A and Exhibit B, verifying that the forged home equity line of credit and Jamal's stolen identity files were perfectly preserved. As I ran a secondary indexing script to ensure no corrupted files remained from the offshore banking portal, an anomaly caught my eye. It was a nested hidden subfolder buried deep within the directory of Derek's primary shell company, Apex Wealth Solutions. The folder was heavily encrypted, but Jamal had provided me with the master key string before we parted ways. I copied the code, pasted it into the decryption prompt, and hit enter. The folder unzipped, and the title of the directory appeared on my screen. My breath caught sharply in my throat, momentarily cutting off my oxygen. The folder was not labeled with a generic corporate acronym or a random string of numbers. It was labeled with a single devastating word: David. It was my father's name. A sudden freezing wave of dread washed over me. I clicked open the folder, my hands trembling so violently I could barely control the trackpad. Dozens of high-resolution PDF documents populated the screen. I opened the first file, instantly recognizing the official letterhead of a major national mortgage lender. It was a property deed and a loan origination agreement for the house my parents had lived in for 30 years. My parents owned their home outright. They had paid off their mortgage over a decade ago. There was absolutely no logical reason for them to be involved with a lending institution. I scrolled down to the terms of the agreement, my supply chain director instincts instantly decoding the complex financial jargon. It was a reverse mortgage, and it was not a standard federally insured product meant to help elderly citizens manage their retirement securely. It was a highly predatory, aggressively structured loan designed to rapidly extract the maximum amount of equity from the property while burying the borrowers in astronomical compounding interest rates. I scrolled frantically to the signature page. My parents' shaky signatures sat at the bottom of the document. Directly below them, stamped with his official credential numbers, was Derek's signature. He had signed the documents acting as their primary fiduciary advisor. He had sat at their dining room table, looked into the eyes of the people who had welcomed him into their family, and coerced them into signing away their entire life sanctuary. I opened the next document, which contained the wire transfer logs for the loan disbursement. The bank had released over $200,000 in equity, but the money had not been routed to my parents' secure retirement accounts. The destination routing numbers perfectly matched the offshore shell account Derek controlled under Apex Wealth Solutions. The sickening truth materialized on my screen with absolute horrifying clarity. Derek had not just stolen from me and his brother-in-law, he had targeted the most vulnerable people in his orbit. He had deliberately manipulated my elderly parents, exploiting their complete trust in his fake Wall Street persona. He siphoned their life savings and the entire equity of their home to cover his catastrophic margin calls. He had literally stolen their roof to pay for his mother's country club memberships and his sister's luxury electric vehicle. I opened the final subfolder, searching for communication logs. I found a hidden email chain routed through his secure server. The dates on the emails made my blood run entirely cold. The most recent messages were dated exactly 3 days before my father's massive stroke. I read the emails sent from my father's personal account. My dad had discovered a discrepancy. He had received a notice about a delinquent property tax payment, a payment that Derek had explicitly promised the reverse mortgage trust would cover automatically. My father's emails grew increasingly frantic. He was asking Derek where the money was. He was asking why the bank was sending threatening letters. He had realized that the equity was gone and the safety net was completely empty. Derek's responses were dismissive, patronizing, and filled with aggressive gaslighting, telling my father he simply did not understand complex financial vehicles. The timeline struck me with the force of a freight train. My father did not just suffer a random neurological event. The crushing, insurmountable stress of realizing his trusted son-in-law had bankrupted him, the absolute terror of losing his home and his security at 70 years old, was the exact trigger for his massive stroke. Derek did not just abandon my father in the intensive care unit. He was the reason my father was in the intensive care unit in the first place. He had pushed an elderly man to the brink of death just to fund his own pathetic, arrogant lifestyle. And then, when I begged him for the $40,000 to save my father's cognitive functions, Derek had scoffed. He had stood in his golf shoes, looked at the man he had secretly ruined, and called him a dead-end charity case. I pushed my chair back from the glass table, standing up in the silent hotel room. The anger I had felt over the forged signature on my own home felt entirely insignificant compared to the absolute lethal hatred that now consumed me. This was no longer just a divorce. This was no longer just marital asset dissipation. This was severe malicious elder abuse. It was a federal crime that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences. I walked into the bathroom and splashed freezing water on my face, staring at my reflection. I had been planning a surgical quiet takedown. I had intended to let the lawyers and the federal investigators handle the heavy lifting while I remained safely detached. But Derek had crossed a line that demanded a personal, devastating confrontation. He had nearly killed my father. I walked back to the desk, exported the elder fraud folder onto a separate encrypted flash drive, and shoved it into my pocket. I slammed my laptop shut. I was not going to the law office just yet. I was going back to my house. I was going to walk right through the front door, look Derek in the eye, and watch the exact moment he realized his entire life was over. I grabbed my car keys, the metal biting sharply into my palm. The tactical silence was over. It was time for absolute destruction. The drive from the downtown hotel to my suburban house took exactly 42 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in absolute silence, the heavy thud of my heartbeat providing the only rhythm I needed. Every streetlight, every stop sign felt like a countdown to an explosion. I pulled into the wide paved driveway of the property I had purchased entirely with my own savings. The exterior lighting illuminated the manicured lawn and the pristine brick facade. It looked like the ultimate picture of upper-middle-class success. It looked like a lie. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The immediate smell of expensive roasted garlic and rich Cabernet Sauvignon hit my senses. I walked down the hardwood hallway toward the main living area. There, lounging comfortably on the custom leather sectional I had bought the previous year, were Derek and his mother, Patricia. A bottle of imported red wine sat open on the glass coffee table between them. Patricia was holding a crystal glass, her feet resting casually on the matching ottoman. Derek was scrolling through his phone, an irritated scowl twisting his features. They looked like royalty inconvenienced by the help. When they heard my footsteps, both of their heads snapped toward the entryway. The scowl on Derek's face instantly deepened into a mask of furious authority. "It is about time you decided to show up," Derek barked, tossing his phone onto the leather cushion beside him. "Do you have any idea how much chaos your little temper tantrum has caused today?" Patricia set her wine glass down with a sharp, resonant clink against the glass table. She crossed her arms, glaring at me with unvarnished disgust. "I was humiliated at the Azure Wellness Retreat this afternoon. Clara," she spat, her voice trembling with self-righteous anger. "The manager treated me like a common criminal because the card declined. Derek spent hours on the phone with the bank trying to figure out why your accounts were locked. You are going to call your corporate branch right now, fix whatever glitch you caused, and apologize to my son for this deeply embarrassing stunt." I stopped at the edge of the living room rug. I did not take off my coat. I did not break eye contact. I looked at the two of them sitting in my house, drinking my wine and demanding my money. The absolute blinding rage I had felt in the hotel room crystallized into a cold, unbreakable weapon. "There is no bank glitch, Derek," I said, my voice eerily calm, slicing through the heavy tension in the room like a scalpel. I canceled the automated transfer. I completely blocked your access to my salary. Your mother's spa days are over. Brittany's car payments are over. The free ride is permanently canceled. Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushing a dark, volatile shade of red. He took a threatening step toward me, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of intimidation. You do not get to make unilateral financial decisions in this marriage, Clara, he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. I am the financial advisor in this family. I manage the wealth. You are going to log into your portal right this second and restore the funding pipeline, or I swear I will freeze every single joint asset we possess. I let out a short, hollow laugh. The sound was utterly devoid of warmth. You mean the assets you have already drained? I asked, watching the initial flash of confusion cross his eyes. You mean the $150,000 home equity line of credit you fraudulently opened against this very house by forging my digital signature? The color instantly vanished from Derek's face. He froze, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Patricia looked back and forth between us, her confident sneer faltering as she sensed the sudden catastrophic shift in the power dynamic. What are you talking about? Patricia demanded, her voice shrill. Derek, what is she talking about? I did not wait for his pathetic attempt at a lie. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick stack of documents I had printed at the hotel business center. I walked directly to the center of the room and slammed the heavy sheaf of papers onto the glass coffee table. The loud smack echoed like a gunshot. That is exactly what I am talking about, I stated, pointing a rigid finger at the top page. But the forged home equity loan is just the appetizer, Derek. I know about Jamal's stolen identity. I know you used his social security number to open 4 shadow brokerage accounts. I know you have been using my paycheck to launder money and cover your catastrophic margin calls because you are an absolutely incompetent day trader. Derek stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the leather sectional. He stared at the documents on the table as if they were a live explosive. His breathing became shallow and erratic. He tried to form words, tried to construct a defense, but the sheer, undeniable weight of the evidence crushed his ability to speak. But that is not even the worst part. I continued, stepping closer to him, forcing him to shrink away. I reached down and flipped to the second section of the dossier, revealing the official letterhead of the national mortgage lender. The bold black text of the reverse mortgage contract sat glaringly under the living room lights. You did not just steal from me and your brother-in-law, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, dangerous register. You went to my 70-year-old parents. You acted as their fiduciary advisor. You looked my father in the eye and coerced him into signing a predatory loan that drained his entire life savings and stripped the equity from his home. You routed $200,000 of their retirement money directly into your offshore shell accounts at Apex Wealth Solutions to cover your massive gambling debts. Patricia gasped, a sharp, ragged sound of genuine shock. She looked at her son, her eyes wide with sudden terror. Derek, tell me she is lying, Patricia begged, grabbing his arm. Tell me you did not steal from her parents. Derek aggressively yanked his arm out of his mother's grasp. The panic in his eyes vanished rapidly, replaced by a cornered, venomous fury. The charming, sophisticated facade entirely melted away, revealing the desperate, malicious predator underneath. He glared at me, his fists clenched at his sides. They are old, Clara, Derek screamed, spit flying from his lips as his voice cracked with rage. They are old, and they are going to die anyway. That money should be mine. I am the financial expert. I know how to leverage capital. I was going to make it all back when the market corrected. You have no idea how finance works. You are my wife. You owe me submission, and you owe me your support. The atmosphere in this living room turned instantly toxic. The sheer unapologetic evil of his statement hung in the air, a vile confession of elder abuse and financial treason. He had completely abandoned any pretense of innocence. He was justifying the theft of my parents' security as if it were his inherent right. Patricia, instead of being horrified by her son's admission of a federal crime, immediately defaulted to her base instinct for self-preservation. She turned her venom back onto me. He is a man trying to provide for his family. Patricia yelled, stepping in front of Derek to shield him. He was making aggressive investments for our future. You are making a disgraceful fuss over a temporary cash flow problem. You bring this up now, making a scene when you should be supporting your husband. If you make this public, you will completely ruin the family name. I stared at the two of them. I looked at the mother who valued her country club status over basic human decency, and I looked at the husband who had literally driven my father into a massive life-threatening stroke to fund his own ego. The revulsion I felt was absolute and deeply physical. I did not yell back. I did not engage in a debate with criminals. The confrontation had yielded exactly what I needed: absolute confirmation of their guilt and an irreversible end to the marriage. I watched Derek pace across the hardwood floor, his earlier panic completely replaced by a terrifying, unhinged sense of entitlement. He did not drop to his knees to beg for forgiveness. He did not offer a single word of apology for putting my father in the intensive care unit. Instead, he stopped pacing, planted his feet, and doubled down on his absolute depravity. "They are old!" Clara Derrick screamed, his face contorted with a vicious, arrogant fury. "They are going to die anyway. Why should all that equity just sit there doing nothing, when I can actively leverage it? That money should be mine. I am the one building a financial empire for us. You are my wife, and you owe me your complete submission and financial support." The words echoed off the high ceilings of my living room. He actually believed his own delusions. He genuinely thought that stealing the retirement funds of an elderly couple was a legitimate business strategy, and that my role was simply to blindly finance his catastrophic failures. Patricia immediately stepped up beside her son, her posture rigid with indignation. She looked at me not as a victim of severe financial abuse, but as an ungrateful nuisance who was ruining her evening. "You are making a completely disgraceful fuss over basic family sharing," Patricia scolded, waving her manicured hand at the forged documents on the table. "Families support each other, Clara." Derek took the initiative to manage their stagnant assets. "You should be apologizing to him for freezing his accounts and humiliating me at the spa today, instead of throwing these wild accusations around our living room." I looked at the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder in their toxic solidarity. They were entirely disconnected from reality, floating in a bubble of supreme arrogance and boundless greed. Any normal person would have screamed. Any normal person would have launched into a furious debate demanding justice and threatening police intervention. I said absolutely nothing. Absolutely. I simply turned my back on them and walked up the stairs to the master bedroom. I pulled a single overnight suitcase from the closet. I did not pack photographs, sentimental trinkets, or shared memories. I packed precisely what I needed for the next few weeks: professional corporate attire, my encrypted electronics, and my personal identification documents. I moved with silent surgical efficiency. When I walked back down the stairs, Derek and Patricia were still standing in the living room, waiting for me to engage in their twisted argument. They expected me to fight. They expected me to eventually yield to their relentless psychological pressure. I paused at the front door, my hand resting firmly on the brass handle. I looked back at the fraudulent financial advisor and his parasitic mother standing in the center of the home I had purchased with my own blood and sweat. "Enjoy this house while you can," I said softly. I opened the door and walked out into the cold Chicago night, leaving them alone with the evidence of their impending federal ruin. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the toxic air of my own home. I did not look back. I drove straight to a luxury executive hotel located just 2 blocks away from the neurological rehabilitation center where my father was recovering. For the next 4 weeks, I imposed a state of absolute, unbreakable radio silence. My personal cell phone essentially became a digital graveyard. The screen lit up endlessly, logging exactly 412 missed calls, frantic text messages, and increasingly hysterical voicemails from Derek, Patricia, and Brittany. They demanded explanations. They begged for the accounts to be unfrozen. They threatened legal action and public exposure. I simply watched the notifications roll in and swiped them away into a secure archive folder. I did not respond to a single one. And 2. I spent my mornings sitting by my father's bedside, watching with profound relief as the world-class medical team helped him slowly regain his speech and motor functions. The $40,000 had saved his mind, and knowing he was safe fueled my absolute dedication to the task at hand. My hotel suite transformed into a highly classified command center. Jamal and I worked relentlessly alongside my ruthless divorce attorney and her specialized team of forensic accountants. We spent the entire month compiling an airtight, inescapable federal case. Jamal was instrumental in the investigation. Using his elite auditing skills, he provided the exact network routing logs that proved Derek had executed the forged home equity line of credit from his specific desktop computer. We successfully matched the digital timestamps of the fraudulent electronic signatures directly to Derek's personal login credentials. We completely eliminated any possibility for him to claim a hacker had stolen his identity or compromised his network. The elder abuse fraud required an even more meticulous approach to guarantee a criminal indictment. My legal team subpoenaed the origin files from the predatory lending institution. We secured undeniable proof that Derek had acted formally as my parents' fiduciary advisor, effectively weaponizing his professional title to force the reverse mortgage. The forensic accountants mapped the exact route the $200,000 took. We traced the stolen retirement funds, leaving my parents' secure accounts bouncing through a digital clearinghouse and landing directly inside Derek's offshore shell company, Apex Wealth Solutions. The ledgers showed the money immediately draining back out to satisfy his catastrophic margin calls and fund Patricia's country club lifestyle. We gathered sworn affidavits, extracted server metadata, and cataloged every single unauthorized transfer. We built a fortress of evidence so dense and thoroughly cross-referenced that no defense attorney would ever dare take his case to trial. Derek and his family spent those 4 weeks floating on the fumes of maxed-out credit cards, entirely oblivious to the fact that their financial execution had been fully drafted, verified, and legally sealed. The preparation phase was officially complete. We were finally ready to drop the hammer. My lead attorney, a woman who had built her formidable reputation prosecuting white-collar criminals before moving into high-net-worth divorce litigation, laid the final bound dossier on the conference table. We had a critical choice to make regarding the deployment of this mountain of evidence. A standard approach would involve marching into a local police precinct and filing a domestic fraud report. But I knew exactly how local jurisdictions handled marital financial disputes. They often dismissed them as civil matters, telling furious spouses to sort out the unauthorized debt in divorce court. Local detectives did not have the bandwidth, the specialized training, or the jurisdictional authority to untangle a sophisticated offshore laundering operation. I was not going to let Derek hide behind the chaotic backlog of a local precinct. We were bypassing municipal law enforcement entirely. We were taking this directly to the federal regulators. Derek's entire identity, his perceived power and his ability to generate income relied completely on his active licensure as an independent financial advisor. He held a Series 7 and a Series 66 license granting him the legal authority to execute securities transactions and provide investment advice. With those licenses came a strict, legally binding fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of his clients. By coercing my elderly parents into a predatory reverse mortgage to cover his personal margin calls, he had not merely broken a family promise. He had committed a catastrophic breach of the Securities and Exchange Commission's regulation best interest. Furthermore, by funneling those stolen retirement funds through shell companies to satisfy his brokerages, he was actively guilty of the misappropriation of client funds and blatant wire fraud. Sitting in the pristine, glass-walled conference room of my attorney's office, I opened my laptop and navigated to the official Financial Industry Regulatory Authority complaint portal. Jamal sat beside me, his arms crossed, his auditor's gaze tracking my every click. I uploaded the comprehensive 500-page digital brief directly to the FINRA Enforcement Division. The submission included the precise routing numbers, the forged electronic signature certificates, and the undeniable proof that Derek had commingled client retirement assets with his personal leverage accounts. I systematically detailed his margin requirement violations and the fraudulent tax schedules he had used to mask the bleeding. As I hit the submit button on the FINRA portal, I felt a deep, resonant thrill. This single action guaranteed an immediate, severe regulatory review. Within days, his firm would face a full compliance sweep, and his Form U-4, the registration document that allowed him to work in the industry, would be flagged for severe regulatory disclosures. But FINRA was only the first strike. The elder fraud demanded a much heavier, more punitive response. I opened a second browser window and accessed the Securities and Exchange Commission's secure whistleblower portal. The SEC possessed the federal authority to not only strip him of his livelihood, but to recommend criminal prosecution to the Department of Justice. I filled out the tip complaint and referral form with absolute clinical precision. I did not write a narrative about a failing marriage. I wrote a highly technical report on a registered fiduciary exploiting vulnerable seniors. I attached the original reverse mortgage origination documents, highlighting Derek's signature as the advising agent. I uploaded the offshore bank ledgers Jamal had extracted, showing the exact timestamps where my parents' home equity was wired to the Cayman Islands to wash his disastrous tech stock positions. I checked the box confirming that I possessed original independent analysis of the securities violations, officially registering the complaint under the SEC whistleblower program. The digital intake system required me to attest to the accuracy of the documents under penalty of perjury. I typed my full legal name with unwavering confidence and hit submit. The screen refreshed, generating a unique encrypted federal reference number. The confirmation receipt landed in my corporate inbox a fraction of a second later. The federal trap was now officially set. There is a specific terrifying efficiency to the United States financial regulatory system when presented with perfectly packaged, indisputable evidence of elder abuse and wire fraud. The bureaucratic machinery does not care about excuses, apologies, or toxic family dynamics. It only cares about the raw data, and the data I had just handed them was a complete death sentence for Derek's career. My attorney leaned forward, interlacing her fingers on the polished wood table. The regional SEC enforcement office will assign a field director to this file within 48 hours, she stated, her voice carrying a sharp professional satisfaction. FINRA will likely issue an immediate suspension order, pending a formal hearing. Because the fraud involves vulnerable adults and active wire transfers across international borders, they will coordinate directly with federal law enforcement to execute asset seizures. He will not receive a polite warning letter. He will receive a raid. I looked out the window of the high-rise law office. Down below, the tiny cars and pedestrians moved through the Chicago streets, completely oblivious to the digital avalanche I had just unleashed. Derek was somewhere out there, likely sitting in his boutique office, desperately trying to shuffle credit card balances to keep his mother's country club account active. He was probably annoyed that I was still giving him the silent treatment, assuming that my eventual return to the house was inevitable. He had spent his entire adult life manipulating the system, believing he was the smartest person in the room. He had weaponized financial jargon to intimidate me and to rob my parents blind. Now that exact same financial system was locking onto him with terrifying precision. The federal government was currently reviewing his bank statements. Regulatory officers were reading his forged contracts and tracing his stolen funds. The gears of justice had begun to turn, grinding forward with a slow, unstoppable momentum. Derek was about to learn that true power did not come from wearing a designer suit or bragging about imaginary stock options. True power came from the absolute unyielding enforcement of the law, and I had just directed its full fury straight at his front door. While the federal agencies began their meticulous, quiet mobilization, my civil legal team struck with immediate, brutal force. The following morning, I stood beside my lead attorney in a polished courtroom in downtown Chicago. We were not there for a standard divorce filing. We had requested an emergency ex parte hearing, presenting the presiding judge with the exact same forensic accounting dossier I had submitted to the federal regulators. We needed to surgically amputate Derek from my financial life before he could realize he was under investigation and attempt to hide any remaining capital. The judge, a seasoned magistrate who had likely seen every variation of marital deceit, flipped through the heavily indexed binder. Her expression grew increasingly severe as she examined the digital signature certificates and the accompanying Internet Protocol logs provided by Jamal. My attorney delivered a crisp, devastating summary of the facts. She emphasized that the sprawling suburban property was a premarital asset purchased entirely with my executive salary years prior to the marriage. She pointed directly to the forged home equity line of credit, detailing how Derek had digitally impersonated me to extract $150,000. The evidence was absolute and unassailable. The judge did not hesitate. With a few swift strokes of her pen, she granted a comprehensive emergency injunction. In an instant, Derek was legally and financially paralyzed. The court order immediately froze all of his access to any shared marital funds. His name was stripped from our joint checking and savings accounts. The judge also placed an immediate block on any further withdrawals from the forged credit line. The financial umbilical cord that had fed his ego and sustained his family was now sealed by court mandate. If he attempted to move a single dollar, he would be in direct contempt of a federal judge. But securing my own property was only the first half of the morning's battle. The far more critical objective was unwinding the catastrophic damage Derek had inflicted upon my elderly parents. My legal team immediately pivoted to the predatory reverse mortgage Derek had orchestrated. Because he had leveraged his official position as a registered fiduciary to coerce my father into the agreement, the entire contract was fundamentally corrupt. My attorney did not politely ask the national mortgage lender for a review. She hit their corporate counsel with a massive targeted threat of litigation, promising to expose their institution for facilitating elder abuse and financial fraud. Faced with the undeniable proof of Derek's forged advising credentials and the looming threat of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the mortgage lender's compliance department panicked. They capitulated entirely within 48 hours. The lender agreed to formally nullify the reverse mortgage contract. They froze the fraudulent equity withdrawals and initiated an internal unwinding process that completely restored the clean title to my parents' home. I received the confirmation call from my attorney while sitting in the bright, sunny cafeteria of the Neurological Rehabilitation Center. I walked back to my father's room. He was sitting up in his chair working through a speech therapy exercise with a nurse. His progress was slow, but the light of comprehension was returning to his eyes. I sat beside him gently, took his hand, and whispered that his house was safe. I told him that the debt was gone and his sanctuary was fully protected. He squeezed my fingers, a silent acknowledgement that the terrifying burden Derek had placed on his shoulders was finally lifted. While I sat in the peaceful quiet of the hospital, blissfully insulated by my newly constructed legal fortress, a very different scene was unfolding across the city. The calm before the storm had settled heavily over Derek and his entitled family. They were entirely oblivious to the catastrophic legal avalanche suspended right above their heads. In their minds, they were simply dealing with a stubborn hormonal wife who was throwing an extended temper tantrum over a hospital bill. Derek was sitting in his boutique office, sweating through his custom-tailored shirt as he frantically tried to keep his illusion of wealth afloat. With his access to my corporate salary officially blocked and the remaining equity in my home frozen by the court, he was forced to rely on his rapidly dying credit cards. Jamal had sent me a brief, highly amusing update detailing the chaos. Derek was actively shuffling balances, taking cash advances from high-interest cards just to cover the minimum payments on others. He was playing a pathetic game of financial musical chairs, desperately trying to hide the cash flow crisis from his mother and sister. Patricia, completely ignorant of the impending federal raid, was busy complaining to anyone who would listen. According to Jamal, she had spent her entire Tuesday morning berating a customer service representative over the phone because her platinum card had been declined at a luxury boutique. She was still under the delusion that I was simply being spiteful, confidently assuring her friends that her brilliant son would force me to apologize and restore her shopping allowance by the weekend. Brittany was faring no better. Her electric vehicle was practically running on fumes. She had bombarded my blocked number with frantic, threatening text messages that routed straight to my evidence archive. She was furious that the charging station autopay had bounced. She was driving around the city hyperventilating about the impending repossession of her car, yet still proudly posting curated, heavily filtered photos on social media to maintain her lifestyle brand. They were all fiercely committed to their grand performance. They clung desperately to their country club personas, charging expensive lunches and luxury car washes to plastic cards that were seconds away from being permanently canceled. They thought they were punishing me with their silence. They thought my refusal to return to the house was a sign of weakness, a temporary retreat before I inevitably surrendered to their demands. They had absolutely no idea that the United States government was actively reviewing their bank statements. They did not know that the court had already severed their access to my wealth. I watched the sun set over the Chicago skyline from my hotel window, enjoying a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. I had secured my assets. I had saved my father's home. I had handed the federal authorities a flawless map of Derek's crimes. The trap was set, the evidence was locked, and the countdown had officially reached 0. Week 6 was approaching, and the dominoes were perfectly aligned to fall. Saturday morning of Week 6 arrived with a crisp, biting chill. The countdown had officially expired, and the first domino tipped over with spectacular force. At precisely 8 in the morning, the quiet serenity of Brittany's upscale suburban neighborhood was violently interrupted. A heavy-duty repo tow truck backed into her pristine driveway, its hydraulic winch whining loudly as it locked onto the undercarriage of her $90,000 electric vehicle. Brittany burst out of her front door wearing an expensive silk robe, screaming at the top of her lungs. She demanded the driver release her car, frantically waving her dying credit cards and insisting there had been a simple banking glitch. The driver ignored her hysterics efficiently, securing the Tesla and hoisting it onto the flatbed. While Brittany shrieked at the tow company, the front door opened a second time. Jamal walked out into the cool morning air. He was dressed in a sharp, perfectly tailored suit, pulling a sleek leather suitcase behind him. He did not rush. He did not look angry. He moved with the terrifying absolute composure of a man who had already executed his exit strategy. Brittany spun around, expecting her husband to defend her luxury vehicle. Instead, Jamal stopped at the edge of the porch and extended a thick manila envelope toward her. "These are divorce papers," Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Behind them is a formal notice of federal litigation. Your brother stole my identity to launder his catastrophic margin calls. I am cooperating fully with the federal authorities to ensure he faces maximum prison time." Brittany stared at the envelope, her mouth opening and closing in absolute shock. She looked from the tow truck hauling away her status symbol to the husband who was calmly walking away from their marriage. Jamal did not wait for a response. He bypassed her, walked down the driveway, and climbed into an awaiting luxury sedan, leaving Brittany completely alone, holding the evidence of her family's total destruction. At that exact same moment across town, another devastating reality check was being delivered. Patricia was sitting in her lavishly decorated condominium, wrapped in cashmere, angrily dialing the spa that had declined her card earlier that week. A sharp, authoritative knock at her front door interrupted her tirade. She opened the door expecting a package delivery. Instead, a process server handed her a thick, terrifying legal document. Patricia tore open the seal, her eyes scanning the bold black text. It was a formal notice of foreclosure. Derek had entirely stopped paying the mortgage on her condo exactly 6 weeks ago, the very day I deleted my automatic transfers. Without my corporate salary flowing into his shadow accounts, the bank had swiftly initiated the seizure of her property. The walls of Patricia's fabricated high society life instantly crumpled. She frantically dialed Derek's number, but it went straight to an automated out-of-service message. The money was gone. The illusion was dead, and the federal hammer was about to drop on her favorite son. While Patricia was staring at her foreclosure notice, Derek was sitting behind the imported mahogany desk in his downtown boutique office. He was desperately trying to secure a high-interest short-term loan to cover his spiraling debt, completely unaware that his building had just been surrounded. The heavy glass doors of his firm were suddenly thrown open. Derek looked up expecting to see a wealthy new client. Instead, a dozen federal agents wearing tactical jackets swarmed into the lobby. Representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission, accompanied by armed federal marshals, bypassed his terrified receptionist and marched straight into his private suite. Derek stood up, his face draining of all color as the lead investigator slammed a thick stack of federal warrants onto the desk. He tried to project his usual arrogant authority, demanding to know the meaning of this intrusion. The agents ignored his blustering completely. With terrifying efficiency, they began systematically dismantling his entire operation. Technicians unplugged his monitors and seized his encrypted hard drives. Agents boxed up every physical client file, financial ledger, and tax record in the office. The digital footprint Jamal and I had provided had given them a perfect map of his crimes, and they were collecting the physical proof to match. Derek watched in absolute horror as his meticulously crafted illusion was torn apart. He frantically reached for his phone to call a lawyer, but a marshal immediately confiscated the device, bagging it as critical evidence. A stern representative from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority stepped forward holding a formal legal decree. He looked Derek directly in the eye and announced that pending the ongoing federal investigation into the misappropriation of client funds, his professional licenses were permanently and immediately revoked. He was no longer a financial advisor, he was a target of the United States justice system. The final crushing blow came as two federal agents stepped up to Derek and instructed him to turn around. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the lead investigator began to read him his Miranda rights. The charges echoed through the dismantled office like a death knell. Federal wire fraud for the stolen home equity. Fiduciary fraud for the shadow accounts and money laundering. Severe elder abuse for the predatory reverse mortgage that had stripped my parents of their retirement security and nearly killed my father. Derek sagged against the desk, his knees buckling under the astronomical weight of his impending prison sentence. The tailored suits, the country club memberships, and the arrogant swagger vanished into thin air, replaced by the suffocating realization that he had completely underestimated the woman he thought he could control. His entire false empire evaporated in a single devastating afternoon, leaving nothing behind but a terrified, broken grifter who finally understood the catastrophic consequences of his actions. After hours of grueling interrogation by federal marshals, Derek was granted a temporary release on bond pending his official arraignment. His passport was seized, his bank accounts were entirely frozen, and his professional reputation was permanently obliterated. He had absolutely nowhere else to go. His mother, Patricia, was busy packing her belongings into garbage bags ahead of her impending foreclosure eviction. His sister, Brittany, was entirely consumed by her own divorce proceedings and the humiliating repossession of her luxury vehicle. Derek was completely isolated. The harsh reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence was staring him directly in the face, and in his absolute desperation, his mind reverted to its oldest, most reliable survival tactic. He needed me to save him. It was late afternoon when the frantic pounding began. I was standing in the kitchen of my secure luxury apartment, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee. The heavy knocks rattled the solid oak door, followed by a muffled, pathetic voice begging to be let inside. He had somehow slipped past the building concierge, likely tailgating another resident through the lobby security gates. I walked slowly toward the entryway, holding my ceramic mug. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I felt the deep, resonant satisfaction of a predator cornering its prey. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. Derek stood in the hallway, an absolute shell of the man who had mocked me in the hospital corridor 6 weeks prior. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. His expensive silk tie was missing. His eyes were bloodshot and swollen, shifting frantically as he looked at me. The moment our eyes met, his legs entirely gave out. He collapsed onto the hallway carpet, dropping heavily onto his knees. The arrogant, untouchable financial advisor was gone. In his place was a terrified, whimpering fraud who had finally hit rock bottom. He grabbed the edge of the doorframe, his fingers trembling violently. "Clara, please." Derek sobbed, tears streaming down his face as he looked up at me. "You have to save me. They raided my office. They took all my client files and froze my accounts. You have to tell the federal agents there was a mistake. Tell them the reverse mortgage was a misunderstanding. He tried to blame Jamal for the audit stuttering through wild excuses. He even tried to blame Patricia for demanding the luxury lifestyle that drove him into debt. He threw every single person he knew under the bus in a desperate attempt to save his own skin. You have enough money to hire me a criminal defense team, he pleaded. They are taking everything from me. You cannot let them put me in jail, Clara. We are family. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man kneeling on the floor. I watched him desperately try to leverage the concept of family, the exact same concept he had ruthlessly mocked when my father was fighting for his cognitive survival. He expected me to cave. He expected the generous, accommodating wife to rush forward, dry his tears, and write a massive check to make his federal problems disappear. He honestly believed that my financial resources were his ultimate safety net. I did not offer him a hand. I did not bend down to meet him at his level. I remained standing tall, my posture radiating absolute freezing authority. I raised my ceramic mug and took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, dark roast tasted like absolute victory. I lowered the mug, holding his desperate, bloodshot gaze, with eyes that offered zero mercy. I mirrored the exact callous tone he had used when he abandoned me in the intensive care unit. "Your family, your problem," I said, my voice echoing coldly through the quiet hallway. "My money is mine. Your federal prison sentence is yours." Derek gasped the air completely, leaving his lungs as the words struck him with lethal precision. He reached a trembling hand toward my shoe, letting out a wretched, guttural sound of pure defeat. He finally understood that there was no rescue coming. The financial pipeline was permanently severed, the legal trap was welded shut, and the woman he had financially abused for 5 years had become his ultimate executioner. I stepped back into my apartment and firmly pushed the heavy oak door forward. The locking mechanism clicked into place with a sharp, undeniable finality, severing him from my life forever. I turned my back on the door, completely ignoring his renewed muffled sobbing from the hallway. I walked back to the kitchen, set my coffee mug on the granite counter, and let out a long, peaceful breath. The corporate liquidation of my marriage was officially complete. The scene shifts from the cold, sterile reality of Derek's destruction to a room bathed in warm afternoon sunlight. I sat in a comfortable chair next to a hospital bed, but the terrifying machinery of the intensive care unit was gone. We were in a private top-tier suite at the neurological rehabilitation facility. The room overlooked a serene garden, a stark contrast to the chaotic world I had just dismantled. My father David sat up in his bed. He was no longer attached to a ventilator. The color had returned to his cheeks, and the vibrant, intelligent spark was fully present in his eyes. The specialized therapy, fully funded by the restricted stock units I had liquidated, was working miracles. His speech was steadily improving, and his motor functions were returning with each passing day. The massive legal fees and the upfront medical costs were steep, but they were worth every single penny. My wealth was no longer being drained to fund country club memberships or electric car payments. It was actively being used to restore my father's health and rebuild our lives. The stress that had nearly killed him was entirely gone, replaced by the comforting knowledge that his home and his retirement were completely secure. I reached out and gently took his hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. He squeezed my fingers, offering a warm, grateful smile that spoke volumes without needing a single word. I smiled back, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of security. I had protected my blood. I had leveraged every ounce of my professional intellect to shield the man who raised me, and I had successfully eradicated the parasites who had tried to feast on our stability. I was no longer a victim of financial abuse. I was the architect of my own absolute freedom. Never set yourself on fire to keep people warm who only see you as firewood. Have you ever had to legally dismantle a toxic family member? Tell me your story in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. The harrowing journey of Clara serves as a powerful testament to a crucial life lesson. True empowerment comes from recognizing your own worth and refusing to subsidize your own abuse. For years, Clara operated under the dangerous illusion that relentless self-sacrifice was synonymous with love, tirelessly fueling her husband Derek's fraudulent lifestyle with her hard-earned success. She bought into the societal expectation that marriage requires unconditional accommodation, even when that accommodation completely drains your spirit, your energy, and your bank account. However, the narrative violently shatters this myth, revealing that predators often disguise themselves as partners. When the ultimate crisis struck her father's life hanging in the balance, Derek's cruel, dismissive reaction exposed the purely transactional nature of their relationship. The lesson here is profound loyalty should never be a one-way street, and financial independence is your absolute greatest shield against exploitation. Clara's transformation from an accommodating wife to a calculating architect of justice highlights the absolute necessity of establishing impenetrable boundaries. She did not seek revenge through chaotic emotion. Instead, she utilized cold, hard facts to reclaim her power and sever the financial pipeline that enabled her abuser. We are often conditioned to forgive to keep the peace and to maintain family harmony at all costs. Yet this story teaches us that walking away is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. It reminds us that we must rigorously audit not just our finances, but the people we allow into our inner circle. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and you certainly owe nothing to those who only value you for the resources they can extract. Take a moment today to evaluate your own relationships and fiercely protect your peace by cutting ties with anyone who exploits your generosity.